So let's try to actually push the limits of what we know about when man began there. So what Anna found there on the other coast of South America, that's just so incredibly old. I think she disbelieved some of her dates at the start.
Is there a lot of skepticism in the academic world, even in the face of evidence?
There is, in part because there's guys that are in the back pulling.
It might be older than Caral.
That's what I'm reading. At least as old as Caral, and perhaps even a little earlier. We have the footprints at White Sands, which is an exciting new find. That's in New Mexico. I'll just invoke his name, Graham Hancock. He's never said that he's an archaeologist. And that gives him a little social freedom that I don't have. These incredible royal tombs were found in one of these pyramids at a place called Sechin.
An earlier occupation, even prior to the last ice age. Is that correct?
Well, Huaca Prieta is definitely one of the oldest.
Man, it's just a series of pyramids there.
Overwhelming amount of archaeology in Peru. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Everyone, welcome to Pillars of the Past. This is my very, very first interview conversation, and I am honored to welcome Dr. Ed Barnhart to Pillars of the Past, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to have a conversation with him. Dr. Barnhart is a renowned archaeologist, researcher, and explorer. He is the director of the Maya Exploration Center. He found the city in Belize, the city of Moxna, when he was 25 years old. He was the director of the Palenque Mapping project, which ended up mapping 1,100 sites on top of the 400 that were already mapped. And it is known as one of the most comprehensive maps of any ancient Mayan city. He's a member of the Explorers Club and has done 3 courses for the Great Courses and has one coming up in 2025. And they're incredible. Funny anecdote, I actually worked on the editing when I was contracted with the Great Courses. But here we are with Dr. Barnhart, and just thank you for being here and having this conversation with me.
Well, thanks for inviting me on. Happy to do it.
So just to kind of jump right into it, I've heard you say before that the dating on the human migration into the Americas has now become a lot earlier than we had prior thought. Prior to this, the whole Clovis first idea was thrown out there. What is the current data telling us?
Well, we have different lines of data. We have the archaeology, and then we have this great new addition, which is the DNA studies. It's the DNA studies that are saying that the earliest of the migrations into the Americas was probably closer to 30,000 years ago, 33,000 years. And there might have even been an even earlier one as early as 60. But that's so far purely DNA studies. There are definitely, a handful of sites that go well past Clovis, but most of those that hit anywhere near 30 are very speculative and sus. But I think a lot of those ought to be returned to now with this new information, that they're not nearly as much of an outlier now that there's corroborating evidence that someone showed up earlier than we thought. As far as the Clovis hypothesis, it's not that Clovis man disappeared. He's definitely there. They are just not the first. The Clovis first hypothesis is pretty roundly rejected now by all archaeologists. I think that we'd been hinting at it since probably since the 70s, but now I think the archaeology moves at a glacial pace. It takes a while for everybody to agree that there's been a paradigm shift, but when it comes to Clovis first, that's occurred. We have
it's a moot topic at this point.
Yeah, nobody says that the Clovis were the first people in the Americas anymore. That's been roundly disproved.
As far as I know, some of the research done in South America, somehow we're finding the oldest cultures or oldest, influx of peoples down in South America as opposed to North America. Is that correct?
Well, it was correct.
Yeah.
And it's still that there are pre-Clovis dates down there. Really, it was Tom Dillahay finding the site of Monte Verde that really showed us that piece of evidence. There are more sites than just Dillahay's, but Dillahay's was seen by over 100 archaeologists. Everybody weighed in on it, and he did a really nice job of being able to leave his research open for other people to independently corroborate what he was seeing. So now that one, I think it goes back to 1409 before now, so 13,000 years, which is before Clovis. Just by a hair, but when you add, all the Clovis stuff we thought was in North America, and now we have something in South America that's verifiably a couple 100 years earlier than the very earliest Clovis evidence. That was a big deal. But of course, now I might be stealing one of your questions here, but we have White Sands. We have the footprints at White Sands, which is an exciting new find. That's in New Mexico at the White Sands National Park. But they found footprints that have organic matter squished in between layers that say 23,000 in New Mexico. We have footprints. So that's another neat one. That one's going to change our minds too. There's a host of sites around North America that also have dates that are before 13,000. So the stuff down in South America with Monte Verde, especially on the coast, on the west coast, that's still a pretty isolated example for the area it is. We have much more earlier evidence now from North America. So now if we recalibrated it all, one could still make an argument that they were first in North America and down to South America in a very, not surprising pattern.
I remember hearing you say one thing that kind of bugged you about Monte Verde is that there weren't many other sites like it around it. Is that still true to this day?
To my knowledge, it is. And it's not that it's not for lack of digging, I think Monte Verde was just in a very special environment where it made a bog-like anaerobic environment and things preserved there in that little valley in a way that one valley over that didn't have those conditions, all that stuff would have disintegrated. So it's not overly mysterious that it's an isolated site. It was its special circumstance. Just like there's a correlate in the Olmec world where we have all these Olmec pieces of evidence, but we only have one bog environment, El Manatee, and that one produced all sorts of wood and skeletons and amazing stuff that's actually a little earlier than most of the Olmec stuff.
Wow.
But we just have one. And I don't know. I guess I do wonder why we're not looking for more bogs. Like we look at a place like the Olmec world, and we're digging all over the place. And of course, there's tons of valid and interesting things to look at. But that bog yielded such unique information. Why don't we go look for more?
More of them. Yeah,
maybe that's easier said than done. I'm not a geologist or a geomorphologist. Maybe that's harder than I think it is.
Hopefully things continue to develop, and it seems like things are developing in the world of archaeology consistently. And like you said, at a glacial pace, theories start to change and evolve over time. But I do think that, like you said, a lot of the evidence is changing as time moves on and we uncover more things. We have the Monte Verde site, and then, as far as I know, one of the oldest structures that is now being redated again by Tom Dillahay, I believe, is Huaca Prieta on the coast of Peru. And that is about 6,000 years old, but they've found evidence that suggests an earlier occupation even prior to the last ice age. Is that correct?
Well, Huaca Prieta is definitely one of the oldest. I'll admit I haven't looked lately at any of new publications for Dillahay, so he may have even changed that or expanded upon that. But it's about 6,000 years. It's a mound on the coast that was built over and over and over for centuries. But the earliest levels show he can get carbon 14 dates out of them. He's found corn, which is shocking. That pushes the existence of corn in a human habitation site way back for South America. The thing that he's dug there is pretty small, really. I mean, it's like a little mound in a tiny village. So it's the origins of that, but it's pretty early. Now, the earliest stuff that's surprising in South America is on the other coast. It's going up the Amazon. There's a set of islands around the mouth of the Amazon that's this big, just labyrinth of uneven looking islands. And there's a culture there called the Marajo. And Anna Roosevelt's dug a lot there. And she's found at the lowest levels there things that are more like 8,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago. She's found pottery under there too. The oldest pottery in the Americas is out there on those islands. And then as she went inland, she found a cave called Piedra Pintada. And it's named that because there's lots of cave art in there. But in that same cave, in the context where people were making cave art, she again found ceramics that date back to 9,000 years ago. She was actually tracking Paleo-Indian times in the Amazon, which is a heck of a thing to try to figure out in the Amazon. But,
Yeah.
we have a hard time finding them in dry deserts in Texas. So, that's a challenge to try to find it in the Amazon. She was tracking it through projectile points that she had seen out in those islands at the mouth of the Amazon. And then she just got pictures from people in the interior saying, oh, my uncle found this in such and such a place. Noticed that the points were similar. That's what drew her into the interior where she found this Piedra Pintadas cave. But
is that in Brazil or Gaia?
It's in Brazil. Yep.
In Brazil, okay.
It's in Brazil. And so, I mean, that's incredibly old. That's a whole nother level of old from all of these geoglyphs we've been finding in the Amazon. And those span from Venezuela and down through like Uruguay. There's so many of them. So, but that stuff is probably, at oldest, the last centuries of the BC period. So what Anna found there on the other coast of South America from Peru, where you're mostly at, that's just so incredibly old. It's shocking. And I think a lot of her work was, I think she disbelieved some of her dates at the start.
Just using her as the example and segue into this question, do you find that is there still a lot of pushback in the world of archaeology when these findings happen that are, quite shocking? Is there a lot of skepticism in the academic world, even in the face of evidence?
There is. There is. There's always, it's a big community. So there's always going to be that conservative, grumpy, naysaying group. And actually, we need them for group dynamic, right? When I said earlier that things change at a glacial pace, I didn't mean the research. That's on fire. It's the consensus opinion of the entire field that moves at a glacial pace, in part because there's guys that are in the back pulling that are saying, no, you need more evidence than that. You need, that's circumstantial. I need more people to look at that. It needs to be peer reviewed, which are all reasonable things to say. But it takes a while for the most extraordinary of new evidence to get generally accepted.
Of course, makes sense. So with pottery being found in the Amazon and pottery, the ceramic period on the coast of Peru, for example, I mean, the suggestion would be that pottery made its way from the Amazon eventually up into the Andes and then down into the coastal regions.
First into Ecuador. That's the sequence goes that it comes out of this murky, not sure what's happening Amazon, but way back, like Anna Roosevelt found, into Ecuador. And it's a culture specifically called Valdivia, I think. They're the first ones to make pottery on that side of the continent. And I don't want to misspeak, but I think they start about 3000 BC. And so they're at least rudimentary stuff. It might, I might be a little off on that by a couple hundred years, but the stuff up in Central America doesn't really start until about 1900 BCE. So there's ideas that maybe South America showed those guys how to make pottery, but the evidence that we have at the moment paints a picture where it starts in the Amazon, comes out to Ecuador, and then spreads along the coast up and down from there.
Makes sense.
It's a funny thing. I've been contemplating this whole, like, giving my opinion about things like this on YouTube and wherever. And I'm an archaeologist, so my job is to soberly weigh in on these things when there are other folks like, I'll just invoke his name, Graham Hancock, who, he's never said that he's an archaeologist. He's a journalist. He's an investigative reporter. He's a writer. And that gives him a little social freedom that I don't have. It's my job to say something substantiable about these issues. I am not free to just fly off the handle too far out. I've got my own theories for sure, but it's my job to inform the public of what we know and don't know. Where an author like Hancock did not take that mantle. I have a responsibility to try to impart to the public what our current data supports. And that's that's the charge I've taken on to be part of this profession, that I need to stick to the facts. I mean, I'd love to fly off the handle. I've got 1,000 crazy ideas, but I can't just go literally chasing dragon bones when I'm supposed to be responsibly informing the public of where our current state of knowledge is.
I totally understand. Totally understand. So sticking on the coast of Peru. So we have that mound at Huaca Prieta, 6,000 years old. And 3,000 years later, we start getting these massive stone pyramid temples that predate the pyramids of Egypt and Giza by 1,000 years. But no writing, no ceramics, no anything. Can you speak about Caral and what we know of the site?
Yeah, Caral is probably the one you're referring to there. I think we have what it starts maybe 3,200 BCE. You might have notes in front of you better than I, but very, very old. I mean, that's 5,000 plus years old. But yeah, no ceramics, no gold, no writing, very little in the way of art, which frustrates me to death. That's actually my personal favorite part of archaeology. I'm in it for the art. I don't want to find any bodies. I don't want to find any bones. It's architecture's awesome, but I'm really in it for the art, and it frustrates me that there's almost nothing from that time period. But what we have in Caral is in a valley a couple hours north of Lima, and it's a satellite, or a collection of sites that together work together. There's a big one on the coast called Aspero that has pyramids, all sorts of interesting stuff. It's right at the mouth of the river, of the valley that Caral is in. As you go up the valley, up the river, Caral is sitting along the side of the river as the biggest of the sites in the valley. But I think they're up to 17 sites they found. So, some of them are villages. It's obvious that Caral's the biggest one, but there are some that rival it in size. It's got this beautiful stone architecture, circular sunken plazas and pyramids sitting around them. It even has some standing monuments with no art on them. Maybe they were painted. It seems that there's a collaboration between these different cities that are living in this one river valley, which is the Supe Valley. There's two valleys on either side of it that also show some stuff about the same time, but it's the Supe is the main valley, and it appears that they are trading back and forth. That the people on the coast at Aspero are primarily subsisting on fish. Neither one of them seem to be cultivating any agriculture that's edible. What's interesting is the agriculture we do find around Caral and the other cities in the inland. It seems they're growing mostly cotton. They have garden plots, so they're not, they're cultivating a little bit, but not on the mass agriculture scale that the people going forward will do. So those guys are making things out of textiles. One of the major things is nets, and they're trading those nets and those garden products to the people of Aspero who are trading fish. Because we see a strong a lot of fish is being eaten in Caral, but Caral is like more than 10 kilometers from the coast. So it's an interesting little insular pattern where they're developing a technique that will continue for thousands of years, up through Chimu times, right? Really up until the Spanish show up. Those valleys work like that, where the coastal products and the inland products help each other out and form a trade network.
So I've got two questions popping in my head. I mean, I went there on my recent expedition. I was the only one there. I'm typically the only one at any of these sites. I went on your great courses lecture in 2012 or 2013. You went to Huaca Prieta and made mention that there was a lavatory there, and that was about it. I went there in 2024. The lavatory was gone, but it was kind of like a junk pile, and there were random chicken and a couple dogs. It was just very.
And now there's that little row of houses that are along the coast between the mound and the ocean.
Yes.
But that's a sad little community. They seem like they have nothing.
It almost seemed abandoned when I was there. Using that as the jumping off place for one of these questions. So right next to Huaca Prieta is Huaca Cortada and El Brujo. And in those structures, in El Brujo at least, are, I believe, moche artwork.
Correct.
And I think this happens a lot in Peru, but do you think these cultures are paying homage to an original site, for example? Or any thoughts on the repopulating of certain areas and how often that seems to happen?
Well, I have often wondered why they left Huaca Prieta there. It is fascinating. From the top of the pyramids at what they're calling Huaca Cal now, right? It used to be Huaca Brujo. From the top there, you can see Huaca Prieta. It's only like 2 kilometers away. It's not very far at all. But it seems on the top untouched by those Moche people. If memory serves, the archaeology at the top that was done by that Junius Bird guy back in the day, he didn't mention anything about Moche artifacts being found on the surface level. So it was thousands of years before it. It seems unlikely that they wouldn't have recognized that it was something their ancestors made. So I think it was kind of a protected homage to their ancestors. That's my best guess, that they did it on purpose and they didn't turn it into a Disneyland like we would have.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, see, and we see there's a structure that's escaping me that, I mean, had several layers of, I mean, I think maybe Moche and then Chimu. I don't know if that makes sense timeline wise, but some locations there, I believe, is clear evidence of being repurposed and reused. Is that correct?
I think that is correct. I can't think of an example, really a strong example right now. Like we were just talking about Aspero, that one was left alone. Caral was left alone. Pretty much that whole Supe Valley wasn't picked over again. I I have a theory that over the millennia of occupation of all those valleys going both north and south of Lima, that those places that they build them up with this irrigation canals and the fishing operations, everything was based on a very manufactured uh, subsistence strategy. And then the El Ninos come. And when the El Nino comes, it just wipes stuff out to such an extent that I think that that group of people say, you know what, it would be easier to move one valley up that's in exactly the same environment and just start over. And so I think they picked up from those areas. I think that happened repeatedly through the centuries on the coast. And that sometimes a valley that was abandoned because of a climactic event 700 years later, another group came in and used the same valley in yet another episode in which they got climate changed out of their valley and wanted to move over. So I think that some of those overlaps are about hundreds of years of abandonment and then reoccupation.
Makes total sense. I actually had to send some stills to a geologist to just from Google Earth, and she said you can see the erosion on the landscape, and just looking at the maps that these massive storms must have come in and then wipe things back out, and so clearly
we see it today. But I mean, entire villages just get wiped off in modern times. We have videos seeing them just suddenly wiped. I think it was, a hazard to live in there, much like Florida today.
Makes a lot of sense. One thing I definitely want to touch on is you have expressed particular interest in the Sechin culture in the Chasma Sechin Valley. And I believe you briefly mentioned that it might be older than Caral. Is that correct?
That's what I'm reading. That there's more and more sites out there that are that are at least as old as Caral and perhaps even a little earlier. It's really only by car it's 3 or 4 hours up the coastal highway, up the Pan American Highway, and then you're in those valleys. So, jumping from one valley to another, not a big deal. They to me actually, from what I'm reading and what I'm looking at when I'm down there, I think they're concurrent cultures. I think that you know how archaeologists are. We always want to say something unique and special about our site. So I think those two regions are actually, jockeying for the same ball. Somewhere around 3000 BCE, there was a pattern over there at Sechin Cosma that was very much like the pattern I just described in Supe, where there was one big coastal city, starts with an H, Puerto Hirta? I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's one big
on the tip
pyramid site on the coast. And then there's a growing number of older sites in the Sechin Valley as you go back. I think those were somewhat masked by the Sechin culture that shows up there about the same time that Caral is petering out around 1800 BCE. We get Sechin Bajo and Sechin Alto. There's stone built big cities with stone carvings, which is something that Caral never had.
Right.
But they've been so cool and such attracting the eye of archaeology. I think that we didn't look at the stuff that was a little more inland or just less substantial that actually turns out to be older. So now some of that is being seen. I was there I guess last April or maybe the April before that. And I was surprised just driving through the desert to some of those other sites like Chanquilo.
Yep.
No, there were a lot of mounds along the rivers that totally untouched. Maybe a few of them were looted. You've seen it.
Yeah.
Um, I
And
think that the I guess if I could say it concisely, I think that there's such a bunch of great archaeology in Cosma that's from a later period, Sechin, Chanquilo, and eventually some Moche stuff that the archaeologists there have had their hands full. They just literally have not dug down that deep yet, but it's becoming apparent.
I mean, you can see it. I had my drone down there, and like you said, you can just look off in the distance and see just a random mound by itself peeking. You start excavating there, there's going to be a structure. Just there's going to be a structure, and I think there's one particular site in the Chasm Valley that really interests me is Talcachiconcan, and it's just a series of pyramids there. Unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of agriculture that has been planted right there on the site, which makes me wonder what could be lost. I mean, that's something else that has become much more in my purview is the eradication of archaeological sites based on like this agricultural expansion. I mean, have you seen that? How does archaeology work with that? Is there what
Oh
happens?
yeah, I've seen a lot of it, and it's to me it's a tricky issue. And the older I get, the more philosophical I get about it too. I did begin with a, oh my gosh, that's world patrimony. You can't be destroying that just for your little farm. But I've come around with like, well, that guy's the ancestor of that temple. He's the descendant of those people, and it's not my temple. I'd like to think it was the world's temple, but if it's anybody's temple, it's his great 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 grandfather. And if anybody has the right to root around in it and use it for their purposes, it's that guy. And so it's a complicated issue. I mean, I do regret that the ever quickening pace of development and population is endangering these sites. But I also think that the people that live there have a right, first and foremost, to they are the descendants of it.
I spoke to some locals when I was down there, and the other thing is just on a philosophical level, what happens if it is labeled an archaeological site? The government comes in, what happens to their land?
Eminent domain. They pay them a pittance, and then they have to go somewhere else, and that sucks too. The other complicated thing is that, as you're well aware, sometimes those pyramids have intense riches in them. And this is part of the impediment of archaeology in that area too. The locals are not only wary of the government taking their land for some sort of national patrimony thing, but they also feel like those are our treasures. Those are our ancestors. You have you read that book? What's it called? The famous one from, I think, is Fitzpatrick, Lords of Sipan.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's such a real story, but it's not uncommon. The story for your listeners is basically that these incredible royal tombs were found in one of these pyramids at a place called Sipan. And the locals quickly heard about all of the gold treasures that were coming out and basically attacked the excavation and felt firmly that those were their treasures, saying, at best they should stay right there. And if they're not staying right there, then they should be the ones profiting from them. I think that every one of those communities, those sleepy little communities, know that there might be riches beyond their dreams in those pyramids, and they might leave them alone out of respect for the ancestors, but they'll be damned if some team of gringos is going to come and suck them out of there.
That makes sense. I mean,
and I understand that.
Yeah, and they speaking to another local, he finds a piece of pottery, and I mean the level of impoverishedness that's down there, or poverty. He was saying to me, if I find this and I'm able to sell it, I'm able to support that, my family with this, and so a lot of
You
blurry
know
lines.
that I'm interested in that. So people told you that they actually make a reasonable amount of money for finding pottery or artifacts and selling them on the black market? Because my memory was that they get paid nothing.
No, no numbers were spoken. It was a very humble conversation, and the feeling I got was a couple of bucks. But if you find a lot, I don't know.
That was the traditional way. There were a couple of savvy or just interested plantation owners, especially those big sugarcane plantations, where like the Larco was one of them.
Yeah,
He would tell people, if you find an intact pot somewhere in the field, bring it to me and I'll give you $2 or $3 for it. And they would do that. I heard the same story in Trujillo, that what's it, Casanelli's
Casanelli, yeah,
museum under the gas station. What a weird
yeah,
place. But
yeah.
when I asked them how they collected that, it was the same thing, that Casanelli would just tell everybody on his land that were working his fields, I'll give you a couple bucks for them. And they were bringing back, 3,000-year-old beautiful pieces of pottery and giving them to this guy for $2. In the Maya world, it's much more rare to find a beautiful piece of ceramics, and it takes much more effort in that jungle environment to find one intact in a tomb that didn't dissolve. And so those guys, those Maya people, can fence it in their communities for, $500 to $1,000, which is a killing for them.
Yeah, yeah.
But then that guy sells it to a guy in Mexico City for $5,000, who sells it to somebody in Europe for $50,000. That's a bit of that's an ugly chain. But at least at the bottom, that Maya guy made some real money that he could really use. But in Peru, in the deserts, there's just so much of the pottery. It's like hundreds of thousands of pieces are known on the market now, and they're all beautiful because the desert preserved them differently. So I think just by sheer quantity, the guys in those communities don't make as much money. And it's funny, like going out there to dig for ceramics up until this generation has been kind of just a cultural norm. It's like what you do on a Sunday afternoon. Let's go out to the desert and have a picnic, and we'll bring our shovels, and maybe we'll find something cool to put on our altar at home.
I heard an interesting story that I think it's the week of Easter. There's this spiritual notion that artifacts rise to the surface, and so that week after Easter is when a lot of people would go out digging. By I believe.
I never heard that. That's cool.
Yeah, I'll end up putting a site.
What a weird syncretism.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Jesus wants pottery.
Yeah, right. One thing that's been very disturbing, and this shocked me on this last expedition the most, is mummies that were literally ripped apart, because they're in the bundles of cotton with the textile, with the ropes around it, and and so I'm at some of these, what appears to be a burial site, and I mean, it looks like a tornado went through these things and just ripped them open. And the cotton's there, the textile's there.
Yeah, those are heartbreaking things. I think that Peru is a big place with a lot of different cultures. And somebody who lives in that valley and feels like that's their ancestor may have more respect and more care in their investigations of these sites, than someone else. Like the people up there in northern on the northern coast, they're not Quechua people. The people that are around Trujillo used to speak the Moche language, but they lost it. But culturally, they're still different, and they feel different. And they like when I was down there in April, there was a big problem politically, and there was a big indigenous kind of response to the corruption. But most of it was coming out of the people of the Ayacucho Valley, which is where the Wari were, and that's very Quechua speakers, Wari descendants, and the people up in the North Coast all told me, no, that's not our people getting done wrong. We're not involved in any of these politics. That's a Quechua thing. We're doing our own thing. So, in the case of what you saw, which is a tragedy, it would be shocking if someone who felt they were of Nazca descent did such a thing to their ancestors. But a person from outside their community would have no problem ripping apart their mummies. That's the Peruvian equivalent of pissing on your enemy's grave.
Yeah. I've heard the vague notion of the indigenous politics and the things that are happening. I want to be mindful of your time here. Do you believe that there's still more out there to be found, new discoveries, brand new ones?
Are we talking? Yeah. Well,
We're talking
yes. Even if we're just talking Peru, yes. Yeah. No. There's a ludicrous amount to be documented. I think that I'm sure you've experienced that if you walk into one of these little sleepy towns and say, "Hey guys, where are the ruins at?" They know exactly where they are, but they're just not documented. They're not, there's not some neat report sitting in a file cabinet in Lima. And some of these things, like in the 1920s and 30s, archaeologists scoured those valleys. I mean, they found a lot of stuff that was recorded once, now 100 years ago, and it's still there. I believe that some of your smart research to bring you to places you're looking for begins with those annals. So, I mean, we have generations of work to do just to finish what we've already found, but there's a heck more that wasn't even documented.
Why do you think more isn't done in Peru in particular?
Oh, it's a combination of things. It's well, we've talked over some of them here. I think there's a social issue. These communities are not very receptive to people from outside their community coming in and digging up their ancestors. That's, if they get the profit motive of tourism, sometimes that's good, but you see it again and again. Like, they dug Caral up. How's the community around there doing? Same as it was ever, maybe worse. So the communities aren't particularly enthralled by people coming and doing this work. The money, Peru is faring better than most of the countries in South America, but that's frankly not saying much. If they've got money for social endeavors, they should be rightfully focused on feeding and educating people before we go digging up stuff. So there's a dearth of money there. There's when you say money, like half the people that are listening to this are like, well, there's lots of rich people in the United States. Why don't we just flood them with money and we'll get this thing done? But that's also, that's complicated and disrespectful. It's Peru's country. They decide what happens with the money that goes into their country. And they are in charge of their own cultural patrimony. So it's it's a respect thing that's complicated. You can't just walk in with a bag of money and say, okay, Peruvians, step aside, let me handle this.
No, there's
there's a process there that you gotta give respect to get respect. And then there's finally just the overwhelming amount of archaeology in Peru. I mean, it's ridiculous. I dare say, if the United States had as much archaeological sites as Peru did, we'd also be struggling to keep a budget to keep it up.
I tend to agree with you on that. I mean, you throw a stone and you're hitting something. It's shocking.
It's outrageous, and I know it's 5,000 years worth.
Yeah, everywhere, every valley, in the mountains, down in the Amazon.
And that's another point. I mean, diamonds are valuable because they're rare. Archaeological sites are not rare in Peru, and by their very ubiquity, they're not as valuable.
So, using the term of value, if you were given the funding to have at it, where would you go look for things? What
Hmm.
interests you the most, and where do you think would be the richest, but in terms of intrinsic value to the understanding of our historical evolution here in South America, at least?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. I mean, like I just confessed I'm in it for the art, so I I
Good.
I I I would have the most fun finding like moche sites that have these fantastic, rainbow colored multi-story buildings. I love that stuff. But um I'd say we need to sink it more into the origins of habitation. We've made such big leaps here in the Amazon, and I think Dillahaye's site, like I said earlier, like let's find some more bog sites. Let's try to actually push the limits of what we know about when man began there. And that's the unsexy archaeology. Everybody wants to find a tomb full of gold, and it's not hard to do in Peru. Nobody wants to work in a bog
Yeah.
or in the middle of the Amazon. It's oftentimes the questions that remain unanswered are frankly because they're in the worst places to go looking for them.
Day after day. I mean, it is like it is grueling work, and
It
I know
sucks
for one you've
living
paid your
in it.
dues.
Your clothes never dry, and you're always scared something's like outside your tent going to kill you. That's I'd much rather be in a city with delivery pizza.
I hear you. um, if you're open to sharing any projects that might be at the top of your wheel here, if you're open to sharing that with anybody, and I'm
Well,
interested.
one of the ones that I'm really working on currently is my archaeoastronomy work in Southeast Asia. I found some really neat stuff. I think that proves they were watching Zenith Passage and talking from city to city about it, like the Maya were. So that's my current main focus. My secondary, the one that's coming back around the wheel, is a map of Easter Island.
Uh,
Years like now 5 years ago, I mapped one third of the island for the brand new cultural association of Rapa Nui people that manage their cultural patrimony. But then COVID hit, and during COVID, there was like a crazy Lord of the Flies revolution on Easter Island. And now that institution is full of totally different people that don't like the old people that I was friends with. So I
so
but I'm getting some traction there. So I'm hoping I can go back and finish what I started for the Rapa Nui people, regardless of who currently sits on the throne.
there's only 2/3 left, right?
Yeah, and most of it's volcanoes. We got a big part of it.
Right? Um, for people interested in learning more from you, I know you have another great course coming out in 2025, and that's on the Olmecs. Is that correct?
That's right. It's going to be on Olmec civilization, shortest course I've ever done for them, just 12 lectures. And I really enjoyed making it. I'm looking forward to it coming out, and hopefully the field of archaeology won't completely invalidate what I said in that before it goes to it goes to the public.
Well, I can tell everyone, and I can tell you from personal experience, those courses, and I get what you're saying. It's the shortest course because the other ones were like 24 and 36 lectures, I believe, or something along those lines.
48, one of them. That was
Yeah,
crazy.
amazing courses on Mesoamerica, the lost cultures of South America, and North America. And I'd love to speak with you at another time about your work in Mesoamerica and North America. I mean, there's so much history here, and I believe I heard that part of your mission with your podcast, ArchaeoEd, is to kind of put the cultures that were here on the map more than they are.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Thanks for mentioning ArchaeoEd. That's my podcast, and I've been working on it for years. It started as fun. It still is pretty much just fun. I tell a lot of adventure stories in it, but I also talk about these cultures. And my overarching goal with ArchaeoEd, with Maya Exploration Center, which is the nonprofit I'm a director of, is in my lifetime, I hope to be one of the people that push us towards a new appreciation of the civilizations of the Americas. There was so much to be admired and so much that stands toe to toe with any of our other ancient civilizations. Now, the unfortunate state of the world is that the West dominates, and we have a narrative that our civilizations were the most civilized and the best, and everybody else either learned it from us or was doing some lesser version of it. And I think, ultimately, if we're ever going to get to that Star Trek moment where we're a single planet, well, step one is uh, accepting that all of our ancestors, regardless of their skin color or where they were on the planet, had the capacity to do these great human things. And we need to involve these cultures from the Americas and from Southeast Asia, and even some in Africa are getting to the short end of the stick. We need to accept that humans were capable of great things in the ancient past, regardless of their location or race.
Agreed. Agreed. Do you think we're going to continue finding things that are structures that are older, like in Sechin? And what would be your guess on this an oldest date, maybe?
I do hope we continue to find things further and further back. I have been caught flat-footed a couple of times in my career, having thought that everything I read was the end-all statement, and then we find older and older things. Um, as far as how far back, I think probably the last ice age is a reasonable cap. Somewhere, I'd be surprised to see something that was stone built and major before, say, 12,000 BCE. But we've got what's now called the Tas Tepelar, Gobeklie Tepe and Karahan Tepe. Those are massively old sites, thousands of years older than even the stuff that was super old in its general vicinity in Turkey and around the Mediterranean. So, I mean, there was one that just blew us away in my lifetime. So if that could happen, geez, the sky's the limit.
I'm interested in seeing it over time if any of the destruction that has happened from the El Ninos and the sands on the coastal desert start to shift. What we start to see underneath. That's where I plan to be, and hopefully, the taking pillars of the past there in 2025 on more expeditions. Uh, Hopefully, we can put some eyes on some of these sites too, and see what new research has been out there.
Well, there's a heck of a lot to find out there, as you know, and I wish you the best with finding it, and I look forward to seeing your videos on it.
Thank you, Dr. Barnhart, and thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.